Thank you. On behalf of Emmanuel Christian Seminary, I welcome you to this lecture. The Calvin Ross and Nancy Smith lectures are endowed by Calvin and Nancy to Emmanuel. This is the third year that these lectures have taken place. And Calvin and Nancy have endowed these lectures in honor of their parents. So we thank them for their generous gift for the hors d'oeuvres this evening and all the other things that they've done to make this time possible. Thank you also to Ashley, who has worked tirelessly to help with the CME portion and a lot of the organizational details of this lectureship. She's worked very hard for this, and we appreciate her help. It's our privilege tonight to welcome Dr. Lloyd. Again, those of you that were in attendance yesterday know what an incredible moment that was to hear his story and to hear the story of one of his patients. I encourage you to see the movie when it comes out because it was very, very moving. And so we welcome Dr. Lloyd back tonight, and he's going to interview and interact with a group of panelists that we've invited. And I want quickly to introduce each of our panelists and thank them very much for their time and for their willingness to participate. And I'll start to my right. We have Deanna Eyrich, who is the Executive Director of Evidence-Based Addiction Medicine at the High Point Clinic in Johnson, Tennessee. And we thank her for coming tonight. We also have Adam Page, who is the Clinical Chaplain in Mental Health and Residential Recovery at the James H. Quillen Veterans Affairs Medical Center. We welcome him tonight. We welcome Larry Albrecht, who is Executive Minister and Pastoral Counselor at Crossroads Christian Church in Gray, Tennessee. And he's also the Senior Police Chaplain, I believe, now for Johnson City Police Department. And we have Dr. Timothy Smythe, who is an addiction medicine specialist practicing at Cherokee Indian Hospital in Cherokee, North Carolina, as well as Catalyst Health Solutions in Johnson City. So we're grateful for their time, for Dr. Lloyd's time, and look forward to this conversation between them, and I believe there'll be time for you to interact with them.
Thank you. Before we get started, those of you who came yesterday, I want to share this with you, and I hate that everybody couldn't see it, but for those of you who weren't there, for the first part of the hour, I told basically how I got here and what happened with me and what I'm like now. The best part of the program was my patient, Daryl Smith. And Daryl and his wife, Misty, are really incredible with what they have been able to accomplish in Harlan, Kentucky, virtually on their own. They've had a little bit of help from doctors in the medical profession, but they've made a lot of changes that I think are very difficult for people to make, particularly without any resources. But the neatest part of it for me was the ride back to Johnson City yesterday after we left all you guys. How many times Daryl's wife, Misty, told him she was proud of him. That was a really, really good thing. My wife has never told me that. She waits at me at home to whack me over the head with something. But it was neat to see Daryl's reaction because he was very nervous coming over there yesterday. I can tell you, we met early yesterday morning, and he was incredibly nervous. And he did such a great job of being open and honest about where he'd been, his experiences in jail, and then what it's like for him now. And to have his wife affirm that was a neat moment for me. And that's why, I'm sure Tim will tell you the same thing in Indiana. That's why I love addiction medicine. I can't think of another field in medicine where you get to see people improve like we get to see them improve. And then the question and answer session yesterday I thought was a really neat thing as well. I'm always amazed at the underlying trauma that people have in their lives that we don't know about. We just go through our days and not that you go around sharing everything with everyone, but I'm always amazed at what people have been able to overcome and what they faced. And that happened several times yesterday. So those of you who did that, know that I appreciate it and feel closer to you as a result. We're going to try to today understand two big goals. We want to try to understand what the various issues are surrounding substance abuse here in Appalachia. And I think we've got a good panel to do that. We've got an eclectic mix, no doubt. We also want to look at what's being done in our area to widen the horizon of recovery. How are we trying to reach out to people? I know that Larry is the chaplain for the Johnson City Police Department. We were talking right before we got started. 75% of all incarcerated folks, men or women, doesn't matter, meet criteria for a substance use disorder. And our response in society, particularly in Appalachia, has been to jail. I'd like to have $5 for every time the Carter County Jail has a jail expansion going on. And it's always the same people that they're putting back in the jail, and then they put them in there, put them in there, put them in there, and then they turn around and put their kids in there, so they need to build a bigger jail rather than addressing the problem. So I think it would be neat to get Larry's perspectives on this. But I'm going to start off with just asking each of you guys, what's your involvement with drug addiction and the recovery community here locally? Let's start with you two.
That would be okay. Well, as you were told, I'm medically assisted treatment of addiction. Should I talk into this? Is this working? Oh my God. Anyway, medically assisted treatment of addiction at Catalyst Health Solutions, and actually at Catalyst we have, I think, a pretty eclectic group of people. We have master's level counselors, and more to the point, what Dr. Lloyd was just talking about when we discussed the incarcerated individuals. 25% fitting, 75% fitting the diagnosis for addiction. What can you do about that? And we have a pretty good relationship with the Washington County Jail, the Women's Downtown Jail. We sponsor Lieutenant Steve Sherfy, Inside Out Smart Recovery at both those facilities. And it was kind of neat. Just this last Saturday, they had a graduation, and gosh, there must have been 40 or so women at this graduation. And they all were so proud to get this diploma. They said that they went through smart recovery, and they had about 10 people talking, and 3 or 4 of them were really good. I was thinking, darn, I'd like to have them here tonight to tell their story of how they were able to turn around through working with Steve Sherfy and smart recovery in the jail, and hopefully have learned tools that they can employ when they get out. Because that's where everything fails. Is you can force someone through detox, and detox is good for a lot of things, but it's not good for recovery from addiction. You got to learn tools to deal with what you're going to encounter when you get out. And at Catalyst, we have actually hired a fair number of those folks getting out as they make their transition to real life and getting real jobs. So we're pretty proud of that work. But in general, I'm there, as well as my colleagues, to help folks that have found themselves in the throes of addiction, and we use the evil Suboxone to try to stabilize their brain. We get them engaged in the recovery network, whether it be at Catalyst or in their own community where they live, and again try to teach them tools to overcome their addictions, and teach them over and over again that they need to change their thoughts and their behaviors, and their brains will change for the better.
One of the things we talked about yesterday, if you take somebody into a treatment program and you simply give them a medication and then taper them off that medication, you don't have behavioral changes that accompany that, you're going to get the same result that you've been getting so far. And that, medication is a part of that, but it's just a part. The cognitive behavioral therapy is a big part of that. And one of the things I want to just make sure you understand, when Tim talks about smart recovery, okay, it sounds really impressive, and I guess it is, but you have to realize a lot of people that we work with don't have a checking account. They buy their car at the lot where you pay for the car at the lot. I've got a rule for my patients. They don't get to buy a car until I get to look at the contract, because they'll sign it and it'll be 40% interest on a car. And I see this all the time. And so car lots that are like that wind up, you can't afford the interest on a car loan like that. And they'll pay every week. As soon as you miss a payment, they repossess the car. So they wind up selling the same car over and over to the same group of people. They don't have checking accounts. They always get on me about my iPhone. I love the technology. I have the latest iPhone, always. Right? I'll have it the day it comes out. I'm one of the guys that stand in line at the store. It's a sickness. But they will pay more for their flip phones than I do for my iPhone. Credit cards, it's just they don't have a way to pay for anything other than cash that somebody loans them. A lot of them have to borrow money to come to the clinic to see the doctor. What Smart Recovery does is start to try to help them with some of these things. Imagine what your life would be like if you're battling this, and then you throw the legal things on top of it. You've got $2,000 worth of fines, where and you don't come off probation until those fines are paid. So it's a really good thing that Stephen will do. Larry?
While I work with the Johnson City Police Department, my primary work is as a pastoral counselor at a church. And I see addiction in the church every day. Every Sunday I go in, there's addiction. There's a gentleman who hurt his back and started using medication, and it's become an addiction for him. It's been a couple of years now. We used to manage the pain, now he just manages the withdrawal symptoms. We've got a lady at one time who began to use her son's ADHD medication because she was feeling kind of low. She was getting kind of down. And now her son goes to school unmedicated, and she can't seem to get past this. We have addiction everywhere in the church, and we're realizing more and more we have to deal with it as a community, as a faith community. And we're in a perfect place because we've earned trust. We've earned the right to speak into people's lives. And we do that on a regular basis. Much of what I do every single week is helping people. It's helping them find programs that they can get into. As you said, a lot of times there's not money. There's not a checking account. There's not a credit card. There's not health insurance available. So I will work and do what I can to get people into residential care facilities that don't cost much at all, anything. And sometimes I'm sending people all around the United States so I can get them a bed someplace, so they can work through the addiction part, and then later on be able to work through that emotional part, that spiritual part that they're struggling with as well. And this is in our churches every single day.
Larry, is that an outreach of the church? I mean, do folks in the church know about that?
So actually, not many people know. It's something that when the church hired me, they said, you can do what you want with this, and it's become my ministry in a lot of ways. We also, and I'm part of a network of a number of churches where we offer programs in the church, such as Celebrate Recovery. It's an opportunity for people to come and just together as a community face addiction together, face hurts, face habits, face hang-ups, and work it out as a community. Support one another and walk, because when you come back from the programs, we have some really good successful programs we work with. We have people come back into the community, and the access to the drugs, to the alcohol is still there in their homes. And so we've got programs that help them face that and work together on a daily basis.
Well, I tried to teach a Sunday school class at my church on addiction, and I guess there were some good things that came out of it, hopefully long term, but a lot of negatives as well in trying to do that. And I'd like for you to talk just a little bit about the barriers that you face. Somebody stepping forward to come to you, because that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah, that's a very hard thing to do. They're afraid other people are going to find it. They're afraid they're going to be shamed for their addiction. The church, every Sunday, there's a lie that's told every single Sunday. This is the lie, is when somebody says, I'm fine. And they answer the question, how are you? It's a lie. And it's one of many lies that they're telling throughout the week to hide their hurts and their pain and the addiction that's going on. And so not only do we need to maintain confidentiality, but we have to shine light on the problem. We have to shine light on the issue. We have to, at some point, help people not keep this secret anymore. We help them, and it seems very strange. On one end, we're pushing confidentiality, but on the other end, we're really encouraging people to share their struggles and what they're going through. And we do that in groups where they can feel safe and comfortable.
Still a hard thing to overcome, that initial stepping out and I have a problem. And we talked about this a little bit in the Q&A yesterday. Is whenever you open up and you're vulnerable and you let another human being see the other side, will they still accept you? And that's our fear, is that they shut us off if they find out that we've had an issue with this or that. But what I learned, and it was just reinforced to me yesterday, is that you never know what the other person has on the inside of them until you get somebody brave enough to step out and say, this is what happened to me. And I'm always amazed at the number of people who go, yeah, I've dealt with that, or yeah, this has happened to me. And I see it in my patients all the time, because we're going to talk about trauma here a little bit. Some of the trauma is so deep-seated, and it's hidden, sometimes not even conscious of it. I can tell you from my own experience, It wasn't until I did something called EMDR that I even had conscious memory of the trauma in my life. Now, is that the reason I used? I don't know. I don't have a clue. I still accept responsibility for that. But at the same time, it really helps whenever you understand kind of how you got where you are. So I appreciate it, Larry. Adam, you want to tell us what your role is?
So I serve at the VA hospital, and I'm a chaplain in our domiciliary, is what it's called, and it houses a number of residential recovery treatment programs related to substance use, mental health, and homelessness. And really what I see in all that is a lot of those are really intertwined for our veterans in that they deal with all those. You mentioned the financial issue. A lot of them struggle with the finances, also have the addiction piece to it that leads into the financial losses, and also have a number of mental health issues that they're dealing with as well: depression, bipolar, trauma of some form, PTSD, military sexual trauma. And so in that setting, we really have a lot of people who are dealing with a lot of different issues in their lives. And so my role as chaplain in that setting is to work with the veterans however they come to us. And so being able to assess where they're at spiritually, religiously, what their kind of existential needs are, being able to see what their needs are, and how I can journey along with them in whatever form recovery may look like for them. So it's really kind of a unique setting, and it allows for some interesting experiences. We have the ability in our setting to meet individually with veterans, but also have a number of groups that, like you were saying, Dr. Lloyd, try and facilitate opportunities for veterans to share about their experiences, and to be able to, in sharing their experiences, be able to relate to one another, and be able to say, hey, you're struggling with some of the same things that I'm struggling with. And there's a bond that's formed there, and then being able to give voice to those, and being able to look at, okay, well, we've identified the problem, what can we do in terms of working toward healing and wholeness in our lives? And so, as I visit with veterans and talk to them about spirituality, that encompasses so much personally. And I think for me, in terms of discussing that with veterans, it encompasses what's their image of God or higher power, and what's that connection like? What's their connection to themselves in terms of self-care, in terms of having self-esteem or not, most of the time not, or not having any kind of self-worth, and what's their connection to other people? Because a lot of times that's not there, or if it is, it's a connection to their drug dealer, or the guy who runs the liquor store, or the people they use with, or they just isolate and they use, and the connection to nature. And those are pieces that I discuss with veterans in terms of their spirituality, and maybe how that's been lost in their lives, but also how that can be brought back in as a part of their recovery.
I was really in the belly of the beast. In our veteran population, for years and years we've talked about alleviation of chronic pain. You have the right to have your pain treated. Not only that, in Tennessee we had what the name of the act was. The Intractable Pain Act, which not only said you had the right to relief your pain, they said you had the right to relief your pain via opiate narcotics. So when you have this population who is at risk, trauma-wise and mental health-wise, and now you are going to treat their pain, or guarantee you're going to treat their pain with opioids, well, obviously you're going to run into a problem with those of them who have addiction. And it's very difficult, so I don't envy your job at all, but he touched on several things that we talked about yesterday. Rat Park, it's establishing that Rat Park, it's establishing those other relationships that are outside of drugs. I got to see it with Daryl and his wife yesterday. That relationship now is different than it was before, and she becomes his protector. I was thinking, if you're going to go near Daryl with drugs, you're going to have to get by her, and she scares me. She's not going to let that happen. But they didn't have that relationship before, and you want as many people in your life as you can like that. And when we share with each other our deepest, darkest secrets, one of the things with you yesterday, Ms. Smith, I feel closer to you after we talked. And I think that you probably feel like you know me a little better after you share those things. And when you do that, you start seeing the human connection, and it just makes it better. I noticed it with cancer patients. And I told you about Gene Auburn yesterday. But if you watch people who are in cancer support groups, they wind up living longer and having a better quality of life. So it's really amazing the power of those interactions. And I want to just touch on one more thing that Adam talked about, is mental illness. And Ed, where Ed went to, he's here somewhere, I know. I was talking about to Ed before this got started. When you look at co-occurring mental illness and addictive disease, I used to think that you couldn't diagnose the mental illness until the drugs were gone. But that's really not true. If you look at DSM-4, it says it is. But the more and more I read and learn, the more and more that doesn't look like it's true. We don't know what comes first, the chicken or egg. Did the mental illness lead to self-medication, or did the medication lead to mental illness? I don't know. The point of the matter is, it doesn't matter. The point of the matter is that you have to treat the underlying mental illness to give somebody a shot at getting into recovery. All right, Deanna?
So I'm loud anyway, so I don't know how far away I have to hold the microphone. I am the executive director right now at High Point Clinic. We are a nonprofit clinic. Our primary mission is education, in addition to treating patients. So part of our great thing right now is we are training medical students. So we have 34th year medical students come through and do a 2-week rotation with us and our doctors at the clinic, and it is fabulous. We also are very involved with Inside Alliance in Washington County and Alice in Sullivan County, and now Carter County Anti-Drug Coalitions as well. And I would urge all of you to do that. If you want to do something, get involved with your local anti-drug coalition. I think that's one of the most important things that you can do. That who's in the audience and I also volunteer at Red Legacy. It is a women's ministry program, not a ministry program, I apologize, a mission program out of the Carter County Jail. And what they do is they go pick up these girls who have nothing and take them from jail, take them and get them clothes, underwear, bras, toothbrushes, shampoo, things they do not have in their home, and try to find them a place to live for a while. They provide support, daily support for these girls to have a place to go, and what they do is they teach them how to be adults. I think one of the most important things that we heard from one of the girls that was talking at the Red Legacy Gala a few weeks ago was that she said, I finally learned what I was supposed to do as an adult. And I think we miss that point very frequently in our whole addiction kind of thing. And we forget that we really are dealing with adolescent people in adult bodies. And we're expecting them to know how to deal with the world when they've never held a job. There are people in their 40s who have never held a job. Okay, I just want you to realize that. There are people in their 40s who've never really parented themselves. They parented their parents, but they maybe have never parented themselves or truly parented their children because they don't know what that really looks like. And so there's other opportunities, certainly there is for mission work. We also go out and we try to educate as many people as we can. We have had places, Washington County Board of Probation and Parole asked us to come, and we did some education for them. We go to the ETSU, to the counseling program, and go into their classes. So certainly would love the opportunity. Anywhere we can go and talk about addiction, we're there. Just call me. Doesn't cost you a dime. Call me. We'll make it happen. And Tim is on that same page with us. There's several of our interpersonal coalition members, Steve as well, that we're more than willing to come and talk wherever we need to make a difference and get people to understand that addiction is truly a disease. It's a disease of the heart, and it's a disease of the soul, but it's also a disease of the brain. And until we take care of the brain, the heart and the soul cannot be fixed. And every addict I've ever talked to talks about having a hole that they can't seem to fill. Okay, so the way I envision it is just imagine somewhere in this place, there's a big hole that has to be filled with something. And it doesn't matter if that's a drug, it doesn't matter if that's sex, it doesn't matter if that's gambling, it has to be filled with something. So when we ask addicts to take away whatever their something was, they have to fill it with something else. And if there's not a relationship standing there, if there's not a person that they can truly count on, day and out standing there to help them learn how to fill it, they're going to go back because they have no other way. Life becomes super uncomfortable. I want you to think about the last time you had the flu. You didn't just grin and bear it. You went to the doctor, you got medication. Most of our people feel like they have the flu every day. All right, just got on my soapbox, Steve.
No, it's, and I think what Deanna hit on there, when we talk about widening horizons for recovery, I think that a lot of what you had to say is about that. One thing is education. Starting to remove the stigma of addictive disease. Have people, and Dr. Woodside talked about this yesterday, having people that get better and don't come back to their life and just go about their life. They get better and then they reach out to help others in a public way. And I think that's one of the places that maybe I disagree with 12-step programs a little bit, is that, if you think about addictive disease and think about people's addiction, have you ever seen anybody get better? Most people haven't. And I didn't think people got better until I realized after I got better, there's a lot of people out there that have gotten better, but they stay back, and that's their right. I understand that, but if everybody gets better, doesn't let themselves be known, doesn't reach out to others, and that is encouraged in 12 steps, to carry the message to those who still suffer, then people aren't going to see that. The way people with addictive disease are treated. We wouldn't stand for it if it was anybody else. Nobody would. It reminds me a lot of HIV disease in the early 1980s, and most everybody in the room remembers that. We basically ostracized this group of people and put them over to the side. And, parents wouldn't let their kids swim with certain kids if they thought they were at risk of HIV disease and AIDS, and really we discriminated against them until we got educated. And they started marching on Washington and raising awareness of their disease. And now when you think about it, you hardly hear anything about HIV disease. I know it's still there. I know it still kills people. But people don't have those same feelings anymore. And they don't have those same feelings because that stigma has largely been removed. And we still have a ways to go there. But I think in addiction and talking about widening the horizons of people that we reach out to, we have to educate, and that's why we'll go anytime, anywhere. That's why when Calvin and Nancy came to me with this, I jumped at it. I was excited to do it. And stigma will keep people in the shadows. Larry sees it at his church. Larry's church isn't in a bad part of town, right? They're not people walking to church, and so they pull up in their nice middle class car and they look a certain way. But then to step out and go, hey, I'm struggling with this. I'm taking these pills. And I faced it myself. I was sick for 3 years, and probably a year and a half of that, I knew I had a huge issue. I got dope sick every time I stopped using drugs. And I know everybody at this university. First of all, I know Jack Woodside. Jack has helped prepared physicians for 20 years. I knew Jack. I knew everybody in the Department of Psychiatry at ETSU, yet I couldn't step out and let them see what was inside of me. And so I think that when you talk about widening horizons, I think that's probably the biggest thing that we can do right now to start to remove stigma. I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about, Larry, we'll start with you, all right? Talk a little bit about some of the trauma that you see in the folks that come to you, and what it's like when they try to, when you're trying to get them to let that out, to tell you the real truth.
We spend a lot of time searching for that, honestly. The traumas that I see are everything from, and I come from an understanding, a theological understanding that we're all broken. And so the traumas that I see a lot of times is brokenness that has been there. Maybe it's even a generational brokenness that's been passed down through the family. So we spend a lot of time talking about probably the most recent traumas, but eventually we get to some of the traumas which are physical abuse, sexual abuse. We get the traumas where mom and dad were alcoholics, and that created the trauma, and that gets passed down through the family. We get to a lot of shame. There's so much shame that people are dealing with. And the church sometimes doesn't do a great job helping people be free from shame. They're carrying burdens that the church has left them. They have set it upon them. It's hard to pick a trauma sometimes because there's so much within the church community. But we're a great place, a great opportunity to help people to let them know that they're loved and that we are all broken and we all struggle.
I think the underlying part of what Larry's talking about is meeting people where they are. We talked about that yesterday. The one that jumps to the front of my brain is a young lady we helped a couple of years ago down in Greenville who was a street prostitute, and she'd been beaten with wire, like electric fence wire. And the last thing that's going to help her is shame her. Meet her where she is. Love her, accept her, and I talk about this in every one of my talks I do for our medical students. When I'm treating someone with addictive disease, I really don't care if they come to me with needles hanging out of their arms. Now, I do. Right? I don't want them to relapse. I don't want them to die or get disease. But I'm just glad to get them back. I can't think of, maybe somebody in the room can help me here. Give me another disease process that when somebody relapses, and we have relapses of hypertension, we have relapses of asthma, we have relapses of cancer, those things come back. Name me another disease process where when you have a relapse in your disease that your doctor kicks you out in the street. I can't think of one. Yet we do that all the time. I do not fire patients for relapsing. I don't fire them when they come to me and they have needles hanging out of their arm. It's another opportunity to help them. And if we can get them to go 2 months this time instead of 1 month, then we've made some progress. And I think we really need to take a look at what our goals are. Because I see that, and unfortunately I see that where we work sometimes. And that bothers me on a visceral level. Deanna, you want to talk a little bit about the role of trauma in some of the patients at High Point?
Sure. So at High Point we have we have Preg Monster and we have New Monster, and so let's just talk about pregnancy. Pregnancy in our natural generation has an increase in violence, whether there's an addiction or not. What we tend to see with our pregnant women who are in addiction, violence is pretty high. It's about 1 in 3 is what we're seeing in the clinic. And now, I don't have a huge group. I've got about 12 girls, right? Because that's about what we can handle at any given time for that particular group. So now they have the person who supposedly loves them, right? This is what they learned. This is a person who loves them that's beating them because they got pregnant. And this could be somebody who's never touched them before, but all of a sudden now they're pregnant and there's violence that shows up and they don't know what to do, so it must be their fault. See, that's the other thing about addiction, is everything is our fault. We don't have the capability as addicts to say, I didn't invite this. This was not me. What I found, I opened Magnolia Ridge as well many years ago, and what we found is men as well as women coming through Magnolia for the first time are talking about sexual abuse, and they're in their 50s. Men run about half. We don't think about that men's sexual abuse runs about half in the addiction community as well. And we never ever talk about it because we don't know what to do with it. And I think that's part of the problem with all this trauma. And everybody's starting to understand trauma and being a part of trauma. But now what do you do with it? Okay, now I know that you're being beat, or now that I know that you were sexually abused, but what do I say? How do I help you? And we don't realize that all we really have to do is give them a hug and tell them we love them. That's all. And that's how we feel in this way.
Yesterday, I got into this just a little bit, but particularly when we're dealing with the pregnant women, we know that the literature says that 75% of women with addictive disease have been physically, sexually, or emotionally abused. My experience has been 99.9999 because I haven't found one yet. And a lot of times, in our profession as doctors, we never ask anybody about that. I don't know if it's taboo. I'm not sure what it is, but we don't ask. And I can tell you that I never get a new patient that I don't talk about trauma. And some of the things that you'll find out are about more than you can take. My wife, Karen, will tell you this. I come home 2 or 3 nights a week and tell her I'm quitting. I'm done, I can't take anymore, and, you know, get up the next day like plug to a blue light and go right back. You know, one young lady I had from Kentucky, whose parents, mom and dad, both sold her into prostitution for basically drug money, and to make matters worse, they watch. And you know, she's 19 now. How do you begin to get? I can't even get my brain around that. And I don't know anything to do other than love her, and I do, and she knows it. And I tell her every time I see her how proud I am of her, because to be honest with you, how do you get up and go to work? I mean, how do you start to fashion a life? And what's your relationship going to be like when you actually have to try to have a meaningful, intimate relationship? And one of the things that we overlook all the time is the lack of boundaries. And we see that constantly. But what kind of boundaries would you have if the thing that's most sacred to you, and for most people that sacred is our sexuality, what if it was just taken? You didn't have a say in it, it was just taken. And only that, it was taken by somebody who was supposed to love you. But we're talking about teaching people, just like Deanna said, from the ground up. You know, my patients, I don't fire them for needles sticking out of their arms, but I will fire them for throwing a cigarette butt in the parking lot. Right? Because it's hard not to use drugs. It's not hard to put your cigarette in the ashtray. And literally, that's where we start. Some days, absolutely heartbreaking. But once you start doing it, it's very hard to get away. Adam, can you tell us some things that you've done that have not worked? That just, you know, despite your best idea, yeah. That's what doctors do anyway. They tell you what's not wrong with you. So
yeah. Let's see, what's not worked? Well, I know we talked about it earlier, but it obviously hasn't worked, and neither do I try it, but to respond in a shaming manner to individuals who are struggling with addiction, and we've talked about in that whole relationship the importance of being able to create space for the relationship to be able to get to the point where an individual can share their story, whether it includes trauma, whether it includes things they struggle with guilt over, that create a sense of shame in their life, and so obviously that doesn't work, and we discussed some of the ways that that's been tried in the past but hasn't been successful. I think so too. One of the things in my role as well as a chaplain in the VA setting is not to tell people what they need to do, but to work with them to help them uncover what that path looks like for them. Because each individual in their recovery, it may look different from one person to another. And so that even pertains like even to a sense of, well, first off, do they believe in God? Or what's that image to them? What are those beliefs for them? And not to say this is what you need to believe, but even in some ways to find ways to model that, to model love and compassion and non-judgmental presence and grace to them. And to model that in the relationship versus telling them what I think. And making it part of us journeying together toward recovery and toward solution. So.
You hit on something there, Adam, that and those of you who were at Milligan yesterday, I talked about this, and so those of you who weren't, I'm going to tell you now. When I told Chip Dodd my deepest, darkest secret, which is I took drugs from a patient who was dying of cancer. And when I told Chip that, he looked at me and leaned back in his chair and scanned my eyes, and he told me that was bad. He didn't say it was okay. And then he told me he'd forgive me and he loved me. And I've been to Sunday school since the day I was born. That's been preached my whole life, but all I ever saw modeled was that the people in my life loved me and forgave me right up until the time they needed to stick me, okay, to get me to do something that they wanted me to do. And Chip gave me that unconditionally, still today, 11 years later, I know it's still unconditional, that he feels that way, and that relief, that when you extend somebody grace, there's good consequences, don't get me wrong, But when you extend somebody grace, that relief is palpable. You know, August 16, 2004, I mean, it's buried in my brain, that moment, because I think that's the moment that my life changed. And I think that we overlook those opportunities and never overlook the opportunity to tell a patient, Daryl, I never see Daryl and not tell him how proud I am of him. You know, and Daryl has strong-armed Rob a convenience woman. And I'm so proud of him. And you can see it on their face. It's just amazing. I think we discount that and we don't give that enough of reinforcement to our patients sometimes. Tim, what have you ran into that you have thought would work really well and just falls flat?
Well, I mean, that's a hard one to answer, actually, Dr. Lloyd, because I've had good advice, and I try to follow good advice of folks like you and others. And I can touch on that, but I want to be like a political candidate, and now that he's giving me the speaker, I want to address a couple things that you didn't ask. And I want the audience to know that everything that everybody has said here, they've referred to community and connectedness and relationship. Just like Dr. Lloyd said yesterday, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, it's relationship, it's connectedness. And in all of these addicts' lives, these people with addictions, I don't like the word addict, to be honest with you, but the fabric of their society was destroyed. I mean, they had no support whatsoever. You know, you want to talk about fragmented society. Those are the individuals. I mean, my hat is off to my colleagues here at the VA and in your church by giving these people a community, giving them a safe place, someone they can connect with. Because ultimately, that's what they're going to need to succeed. Again, I do medically assisted treatment of addiction. I can write a prescription very easy, and I'm a believer in medically assisted treatment of addiction to stabilize the brain and to keep them from thinking every second of every day. Every second of every day is how am I going to get my drug? How am I going to get the money to get my drug? If you were listening to Dr. Lloyd yesterday, you can relate. You know, took on vacation, he needed 700 pills. But the whole time on vacation, you're thinking, I'm going to be returning on Sunday, and I'm going to need more pills. That's what these people do every day, and on top of that, they're sick as a dog every day. And if you can take that element away to stabilize the brain, and then get into a community, which Deanna, her clinic tries to give them a community. At our clinic, we try to do that. That's what's going to get them well. Staying in long-term recovery is becoming part of the community, and destigmatizing the disease is a huge, huge, huge part of it. I won't steal Max Planck's quote about teaching people, how to do things differently. But the guilt that's associated, you're already guilty as heck. We all have anecdotal stories, and I'll share one from just a few days ago. I had a young lady, 24 years old. She had started using when she was 9 years old. Both her mother and father were addicts. They separated. The father went off somewhere, and the mother started, having a lot of boyfriends over, bringing drugs to her and such. And at 12 years old, she allowed those boyfriends to use her daughter, whatever it took. And as the conversation went on, I'm as an anesthesiologist, I'm not particularly prepared for this, but I've been around counselors enough to know. And during the course of the conversation, she made the point that she made her decisions, and she knows she has to lay in the bed that she laid in. I asked her, "What do you mean by that?" And she said, "Well, when DCS asked me if I wanted to go with them to stay with my mother, I told them I wanted to stay with my mother." She was 12 years old, using drugs, and she's blaming herself for that decision. She had no role in that decision at all. And so now, again, trying to get her part of the community. She lives in government housing. She has 2 children now. I get the idea that Lortab grows on trees, on the bushes outside there. Literally, that's the way it's described. You can't clean a stone from a mud puddle and take it out, clean it up, wash off the sink, and put it back in the mud puddle and expect it to stay clean. It just isn't going to happen. And then on top of that, in order for her to get her medicine, she has to travel to North Carolina or Virginia, because none of the pharmacies in Kingsport or Johnson City will fill her prescription, because they look down on that person, and we've got too many of you addicts here already. Again, this is what needs to change, and by talking to groups like you, hopefully we can change the stigma and get people out of the crevices and the cracks, so that they can get treatment and become productive members. Because unlike my pain clinic that I practiced for 15 years, every single one of my people with a disease of addiction have jobs. They actually get up and go to work. But they usually pay cash and so forth, and you're right, they don't have credit cards, they don't have checking accounts. So I think that's all the notes that I had read for now. Oh yeah, I wanted to quote a good friend of mine, Dr. Vance Shaw, and he says, this is apropos, it's hard to be a middle-class, well-adjusted adult person when you've been raised by wolves. And these people have been raised by wolves. Now, where did the wolves come from? Well, if you want to go back to Appalachia, it came back when the coal mines were in full swing and then they went into decline. These people became penniless overnight. That's when the pill mill started to open up. That's when Purdue Pharma said, hey, we got this wonderful drug for pain, and they gave it away like candy. And people escaped their reality. They escaped their reality, they fragmented the society, and they had nothing left to turn to. Anyway, I'll pass the mic now. So barriers, lots of barriers, but I'm so good I haven't done that yet.
Thanks, Tim. The quote Tim was referencing Max Planck, the Nobel Prize winning physicist, said about science. He said, science advances one death at a time. Now, that's a paraphrase, but I think that that's true when we talk about addictive disease. And you know, it's amazing to me that the number of people that will have opinions on exactly how people need to be treated who have addictive disease, but they have no knowledge of the science behind what we know about addiction now or about addiction treatment. And you know, they won't step into another area. You know, most of the time I'm talking to folks that are non-medical, and I tell them, you know, if somebody goes down with a heart attack right here, you're probably going to look at me to help them. I'm a hospitalist, I'm an internist, I take care of people in the ICU all the time. You're probably going to hope that I help them. Yet if they go down with addictive disease, everybody in the room is going to think that they know what that person needs. And so whenever, I think when we feel that way, we're looking at addiction as a moral failure. And addiction is not a moral failure. And it's not as simple as just a drug. We talked about that yesterday. It is a complex disease, and I think these guys have done a great job talking about that complexity. Calvin asked me this yesterday, or somebody asked me this yesterday. I thought it was Calvin. Where could you see somebody, an entity like the church, how can they go? I'll throw that at you.
The church community is probably in the best place to meet the needs, not only of the people of the congregation, but the community around them. At my church, we're the community center. This is where everybody goes. On any night of the week, we've got football going on there, cheerleading, basketball, and all kinds of great community. People know us for that. But they also know us as a church that will do pretty much anything for you. They'll help you in any possible way. Churches need to open their doors so the communities can begin to trust them. I drive by a church every single day that has a gate in front of it, and I know it's not their intention. But that gate simply says you're not welcome. Once the churches begin to say you're welcome, come in, be here, enjoy, you know, and treat people as guests, we begin to build trust with that community. And many of the people I work with are not church members, but there's somebody who at one time came to the church for an event, and they knew our congregation, and so they trust me because they trust our church. And they trust what I'm going to share with them, and they trust the fact that I've got their best interest in mind, and that I'm not going to judge them, I'm going to love them for who they are. The church is in the absolute right place to help with addiction. We have great programs that have come along in the last couple of decades, Celebrate Recovery style programs, really make a difference in people's lives. It creates the community that we were talking about, the opportunity to come together weekly, to build close relationships. This is not a program, it is a lifetime, it is a lifestyle. And that's what begins to make a difference in the community and how the church can do best at helping with the issue of addiction.
You're going to take the same question?
Yeah, I think being in the VA setting is kind of unique in that, say I'm the pastor of a rotating group of like 130 individuals that come in every couple months. So it really gives me an opportunity to have relationships with a lot of people, both inpatient and as outpatients. And I think to, like I said earlier, to continue to model just that love and that grace in connecting with these individuals. And one that comes to mind is just an individual who came into treatment, and over the course of treatment, it came out that he had deeper issues related to military sexual trauma, which is a really significant issue in the VA and in the military services that affects both men and women. And there's a tremendous amount of shame revolving around the fact that a man is raped or some type of sexual trauma that they experience. And obviously they feel like I'm probably the only person that's experienced this, and I shouldn't talk about it. And so, this individual that I'm referring to began to talk about it, and in the course of our relationship, he began to open up to share more about it and more about how it's affected his life since it happened some 30 years ago. But he's carried that for 30 years, and he's used his addictions to just completely numb any kind of drug, alcohol, sex, just to numb himself out. But I think that relationship gave us a chance to connect, for him to be able to verbalize his story and release some of that shame that he carries related to that. And so that's a great opportunity for me in connecting with these veterans and giving them opportunity to give voice to some of those trauma stories. To go back to that for a second. And I think also to help find ways, earlier on I mentioned kind of the existential need that veterans face in, what am I here for? Why am I living? And in the face of addiction, my life, my purpose in life is, okay, I wake up in the morning, how am I going to get the money to get the drugs I need? What am I going to do then? I use drugs, get them, use the drugs, get high, sleep it off, wake up the next morning, do it again. And so what purpose is that? And so I think for my working with veterans and a part of the recovery is beginning to discuss, okay, well, what does it look like for you to have a greater purpose in your life? Maybe as small as in terms of your recovery in the immediacy, in terms of getting healthier for yourself, but then how are you going to begin to reach out and to build some connections and to maybe get involved in a church setting where you can find a greater purpose, some form of work. What would that look like for you? And we've got a guy just recently who has begun to do that. He's been struggling with addiction and relapse and addiction, and each time he would go a little bit further. But he's just begun to look in terms of his purpose, and he's begun to volunteer at a local agency in working with other individuals who are struggling with addiction. And so he's getting a chance to share his story and kind of share his struggles and to make those connections. And it's really given him great purpose to hear him talk about how much energy it gives him, how much excitement it gives him to know that he's finding ways to give back and to help others in the course of that. So I think that's part of my role. It's not just connecting with them and in some cases being their pastor, being their chaplain, but then also looking at how can they be connected in the community as well.
I had a ton of gold there. There's so many things going through my mind as I listen to you, and one of them is that whenever people who don't use substances, who've never had a drug or alcohol or anything like that, don't quite understand. For the most part, you don't use drugs to get high. You use drugs to not feel. And Adam used the appropriate word, which is numb. And as I was coming off of narcotics and I started to have real feelings again, it scared me to death. And I realized that I had been trapped years and years and years of just being scared of my own feelings, not knowing what to do with my fear, my anger, my hurt, my shame, my guilt, my sadness. I didn't have any idea what to do with those things. And when you handle those things in the impaired state, things like depression, rage, anxiety, how long can you live like that? And then all of a sudden you get your hands on a pill or on a bottle, and those things are eased, and you get relief from them. People told me a long time, I don't know what you did that for. It doesn't work. Well, I can assure you it works. I promise you, if it didn't work, I'd have stopped doing it a long time ago. So numbing feelings is something that came to the forefront. The other thing is the secrets that we keep inside of us that Adam was talking about. They're described to me like this, and I love this analogy. They're like obligate anaerobes. You know what an obligate anaerobe is? It's a bacteria or a bug that cannot live in the presence of oxygen. Okay, if it's oxygen there, it just explodes and dies. Okay, and then the other type of bugs cannot live whenever oxygen is absent. Right, so they require oxygen. So obligate anaerobes die in the presence of oxygen. So if you think about those things deep inside of you that you think are going to kill you, they're obligate anaerobes. And when you spit them out, you let them hit air, they die. They lose their power. And it's an amazing thing because that's what we're talking about doing. Getting people to spit those things out inside of them that kill them. And then when they spit it out to another human being that's ready to step into a relationship, it's amazing the things that can happen. So if you ask me as a church, as an organization, or as an entity such as a church, what can you do? I think that's it. Is being, Catholics, I guess, have believed that forever, with confessionals, but being able to spit that out and realize that the person on the other end still loves you, extends you that grace. That was great stuff, Adam. We got about 5 minutes. Again, I'll let you have the next to last word. What do you see as things that people can take out of here today that can will help them reach out to the folks that we're talking about?
Let's see, some things that you guys can do. Get involved. And I appreciate that every one of you come out, so that means that you want to be involved and you want to do something different. Step outside your own comfort zone. The reason we don't ask is because we don't know what to do with people. So when we ask a question and we say, how are you doing today? We don't really want to know. Not really. We want to hear them say, I'm fine, and then we've done our obligatory, okay, great, you're good for today. Because if they really told us, we'd have to do something. And so by coming out, I think you guys all want to do something. So there's several things that you can do. You can volunteer. You can join the Anti-Drug Coalition in your county. You can look for resources. So Families Free is here in Washington County that helps, that could use volunteers. There are drop-in centers for people who are just coming out of jail and trying to make it here in Johnson City as well. The biggest thing for me is if you can volunteer with an open heart, and that's it, right? Just volunteer with an open heart, reach out to one person. We all realize that you cannot, most of the time, help people in your own family. So I wanted to say that. But it doesn't mean that you're inadequate. It means that that person is too close to you and they can hurt you a lot faster than somebody you don't know. So don't try to hurt the person in your family. Leave that for somebody else. But help the people outside of your own family. But inside your own family, it's just hard. Most of us get into this work because of ourselves or someone else in the family. And you think we're going to be able to help them, and then we don't. But we can help these 100 other people outside. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at. Just being open.
Deanna hit on this just a little while ago. She talked about a group over in Carter County, Red Legacy, and Angela Murray has run that since she started it. And I went to the gala last year, and the women in that group earned the right to participate in a fashion show. I was one of their escorts. Angela asked me to escort one of the young women, and so I'm from Boones Creek. I hadn't been in a whole lot of fashion shows. And so I go, and I was thinking, man, to be honest with you, my reaction at first was like, well, that's pretty corny, fashion show. And then I got there, and I watched these young women and how they got themselves made up, the outfits that they had on, and the pride that they took walking down through there. And I realized that I'm a piece of crap, and I didn't deserve to get to escort the young lady that I escorted. It's amazing how people will hold their head up when you give them that. And Angela does a great job with it. And it's not big things. Having some deodorant, Q-tips, feminine products, it's not big things, but they make a huge difference to a lot of our patients. But Tim, I'm going to give you the last word, and I'm going to ask you specifically because I heard it's one of the many reasons I love Tim. Tim, you weren't always interested in addiction, so what happened?
What happened? As I say, I practice pain management, interventional, and medical pain management, and I guess kind of had an epiphany, really. I used to believe, I grew up in the days when the pain was the fifth vital sign, and everybody deserves pain relief, and we had these great tools to do it. They call opiates. And Purdue Pharma, like I say, not trying to beat up on anyone in particular, but they hit us heavy. The sky's the limit. Nobody gets addicted. Harvard Medical School was teaching that people with pain don't get addicted because the pain drowns out the euphoria. A worthless article in the New England Journal supposedly purported that only 1% of people taking narcotics for pain become addicted. Now again, I'm not saying that the drug really necessarily caused the addiction. The propensity for addiction was there, the fragmented, community was there, but it sure did expose an awful lot of people. And I put a lot of medications in a lot of people's medicine cabinets, thinking I was doing a good thing. And the teenagers, the first exposure mostly is coming from the kid, their parents' medicine cabinet. That's what I learned when I went to my first addiction lecture. They didn't teach us that at any of the pain medicine lectures. And I'm thinking, well, holy mackerel. These kids take their narcotics from the patient's medicine cabinet, they go to a party, they put it in a bowl, and there may be 80 kids at that party. Everybody else, the majority of people that abuse drugs, gambling, whatever, they don't get addicted. But there may be one, there may be two, that they do. They get addicted. They are set up for that addiction, whether it flips a chemical switch is a popular notion, or whether they, their rat part was such that as Dr. Lloyd said yesterday, I thought I found a cure for my depression and my anxiety and everything else. And when you talk to these people, Dr. Shaw has come up with 3 questions. When they have a strong, predilection for addiction, when you ask these patients 3 questions. 1 is, do you remember the very first time you took a pain pill? And most of them do. 2, how did it make you feel? It made me feel like $1 million. I felt like I was shy. I couldn't go into a crowd. I took that pill 45 minutes. I thought everybody in the room wanted to talk to me. I was the man about town. And 3, is there any history of physical abuse? If they answer all 3 of them, they're a big setup for addiction. And I started asking my pain patients those questions. And it's amazing how many answered yes, affirmative on all of those. When I started talking to my pain patients, how do they feel in the morning? Their description is exactly like the people with addiction. Exactly. By and large, there's a lot of overlap between chronic pain, depression, and addiction. And trying to identify that border and direct people to the help they need, I felt became a mission of mine because I thought I contributed to the problem. And that's really what got me interested in addiction medicine. And I'll just echo what Dr. Lloyd said yesterday, how it really is a wonderful field of medicine. I never thought I'd be doing it. I heard a great quote when I was at a rheumatology conference once, and the guy at the podium said, as rheumatologists, we really just chronicle the decline of the human body. And really, medicine in general, that's what you're doing. Internal medicine, any of it, you're chronicling the decline of the human body. But in addiction medicine, you are not. You're saving people. You see people's lives turn around. It's very rewarding.
Thank you, Tim. I know you weren't expecting that question, but I've been amazed when I've worked with Tim and getting to know him and seeing what his motivations are. And I think a lot of folks in this room, have the same motivation. I don't know, Kelly, you want to take questions? I think we had it to 7:15, so we'll be okay. What's that? Okay. I guess we can take questions. We can take questions from you. Yes.
Deanna, you mentioned that High Point is taking residents in and doing rotations and stuff. Is there anything being done for high school students? Is anybody going to the schools, reaching out to these kids before they're age 15 and teaching them about what's happening with their brain and stuff?
Honestly, the anti-drug coalitions try to fill that gap as best they can, but they are super underfunded as well. most of us don't want to touch anybody under 18 with a 10-foot pole. There's such liability issues that surround dealing with teenagers and teenage things. So I don't know of anybody in our community other than the anti-drug coalitions who are trying to step up. That would be more a general question.
The health, there are a lot, I mean, it is a part of the curriculum. I don't know to what extent they're talking about the brain, but to be honest, the biggest challenge is getting the schools to understand how important it is. Because it's just like how they cut out music and they cut out art and they're all about the academics and they don't have time for anything else. It's helping them to understand that these health issues are very important, and just like kids need to learn how to balance a checkbook, they also need to understand what these things can do to them. So even it's hard for us to get in the door, and there's certain things we can't talk about that they can't talk about. I know the health department does some outreach, and it is covered in a lot of the health curriculum, but I honestly can't say, I don't know to what extent. I do know that there are some efforts, at least within Washington County right now, where we're working with the school system and at the governmental level, because sometimes these things need to come from the top down, that we're actually working to kind of look at what is being covered and what isn't. And not only in Johnson City, but in Washington, not only Washington County, but Johnson City schools as well, to really take a look at that.
And can I throw it up? I'm sorry. Can I just throw it up to Thad for a quick second? He works with CCS, and they have an adolescent program.
Right. Once kids get into trouble, once they get on the radar, there is some help. There is an outpatient program through Frontier Health called the Adventure Program, and then we have a residential program for substance use disorders for
But before that,
adolescent boys. What's that?
Before then, before they get into trouble, is there something out there?
There were some prevention programs, and I'm not sure exactly where that is at. With Frontier Health has the contracts now for prevention, but I think in the schools where they have the student assistance program, they're doing some prevention work, but it's kind of hit and miss. And as Deanna and I are both on the Carter County Drug Prevention Coalition, we are trying to get more education into the schools, but there again, it's kind of hit and miss right now. Right now, it's basically a school-by-school basis. If the principal wants to see something happen, there is some education. But we don't really have whole school districts, as far as I know, that are doing anything specifically to target addiction or the potential for addiction.
I think it's interesting to listen. I think it's a great question as well, to listen to kind of the dearth of things out there. This is, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a bigger public health problem than what we're talking about. Yet, whenever you ask the question, what are we doing to prevent it, you almost get crickets, right? And besides the crickets, you actually have a bunch of obstacles being put up. And it's one of the things, I wish Rob Pack was here, but Rob does such a great job of this, and Tim and I are going to try to do this in the morning. Tim and I, those of you who believe in prayer, pray for Tim and I tonight, because we're going to try to explain this to a politician tomorrow. And we need divine intervention, actually. But if you look at the continuum of things, primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention, and now with the use of the drug naloxone, we're actually Project Lazarus, bringing back from the dead. That'd be quaternary prevention, and that's what we're talking about. What are the programs out there that have been shown to work? What are the outcomes? The only thing that matters here, folks, are outcomes. I don't care about anything else. Outcomes matter, and we know some things that work. So how do we get those things that we know work? How do we get them where we need them, and stop having barriers put up? When you asked that question, the first thing that popped into my mind, because you said high school. Okay, Sheriff Ronnie Lawson and I were together about a year ago, and he told me about one of his deputies getting called to Rogersville Elementary School because one first grader got caught showing another first grader how to crush up a Lord's hat. Okay, that's 6 years old. So by the time you get to high school, the horse is out of the proverbial barn. And so I think that we need to be open to to looking at prevention programs that do work, because we know they're out there. But as Jennifer said, getting into schools is a very difficult thing. And right now it's very short-sighted. You may not see a benefit of it right now, but we're dealing with it and building more jails and taking babies away from their mamas who they've just been born to because mom is addicted to drugs and the baby is born dependent. We're going to pay for it one way or the other.
Stephen, may I ask one other thing before this question? I apologize, Dan, but just for the audience here also, that, again, I think church plays a big role in that, and talking to the people. And if nothing else, you can take away, if you can prevent a child from using a drug before the age of 18, the risk of addiction decreases dramatically, because the connections in the brain start to be made. For males, of course, it's later. But if you can do nothing else but police your kids or your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, give them a community in the church, and keep them from using before the age of 18, the risk of addiction is going to go down dramatically through that one intervention.
Sue?
Yeah, can I just say, this is a little hit and miss, and it depends on whether the principal will let you in the school. But at our nursing school, medical school, public health, we go in as teams to the schools. And we really have been quite successful in every semester getting a group of students in there to talk to the other students and to deal with issues. We ask them what are their major concerns, and it always is depression, suicide, and addiction. And so we're trying to get programs to look at self-esteem, stress management, and all those other things that contribute towards it. We've been able to, if I could just say one thing, Mountain City has welcomed us in. We all know Mountain City, some of the issues there. And for the past 4 years, they have asked us to come in, and it's that one-on-one. It's that kid that goes up and says, "You're a medical student. You're in medical school. Tell me about it. What's going on?" And they're able to connect with the students. So we're really trying to push that in our health education programs.
We've gotten to the point at where we're at in our church. We've got such a great relationship with our community and the schools, where the schools refer people to us now. They refer families to us. They refer kids to us. We have a situation when there's an epidemic of cutting. They'll call us in to work with kids. They invite. Tomorrow I'll be at FCA meeting at one of the schools because they know me and they trust me. And we're talking about this issue.
Mr. Smith?
Is there any place for a person who is a victim of an addicted person? Is there any place to go for help?
So there's this program called Celebrate Recovery. You may have heard me speak about it earlier. We have a program that's called Celebrate Recovery. And this is not just a program that's about addiction, but it's about people who have been hurt. And sometimes it's hurt by addiction, sometimes it's hurt by an abusive family relationship. This is a place where people who have had those shared common experiences can come together and together work them out and share in that community. We found that if we just work with the person struggling with addiction and we don't work with the whole family, we almost see the addiction become back again and become chronic. We have much more success when we can reach the whole family.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about Suboxone treatment and how it has changed? There's a lot of misunderstanding about Suboxone. Some people are scared of it. Some people see it as a taper down only treatment plan. Some see it as a long-term sustaining plan. What's your perspective and your philosophy of use?
And with that, please, the difference between Subutex and Suboxone?
I know you're going to answer that one.
All of the above?
Yeah,
I'm happy to yield to.
Well, I want to give you one nugget here. If I took 1,000 people with a heroin addiction, I laid them out here on the floor, and I walked out every morning with some pills in a bucket like you feed hogs, and I just fed them like that, just like this. Don't care about them, don't care their name, don't care anything else. Couldn't give two craps, but I just stuck a pill in their mouth every day and walked off. improve their mortality by about 70% with the medications that we already have. Now, I always challenge my audiences, give me another medication that will improve your mortality by 70%. You can search your brain all you want, you're not going to find one. Yet, when I say that drug is methadone, right, now we get a visceral reaction, right? Or I say that drug is Suboxone, we get a visceral reaction. I think we have to change our mindset on what is successful. That's why I brought Daryl Smith with me yesterday. If you have access to what I had access to, what Jack Woodside had access to, okay, that'd be great treatment. But not everybody has that. Very few people do. Daryl Smith had access to medication and a bulldog for a wife. And he takes 1 pill a day, and he has now for 7 years. He has a job. He owns his own business. He has 4 rental properties that he owns outright. That doesn't owe anybody any money. He takes care of a special needs kid with kidney issues. He has another kid who's healthy. He's happily married. He owns his own home. Is there anybody in the room going to tell me he's not recovered? If you can explain to me how he's not, then I'd like for you to do that. I can't see that. Because if you're a diabetic, and most diabetes we know comes from what? Eating too much, not exercising enough. I would submit to you that that's a behavioral issue. All right? A lot of diabetics would do very well if they exercise more and ate right. Yet most people don't. So what do? We give them metformin. We give them oral sulfonylureas that lowers their blood sugar. I have yet to get a diabetic from a hemoglobin A1C of 9 to a hemoglobin A1C of 6.5 and say, all right, we've got you down there now let's come off the medication. It doesn't happen. We look at addiction differently. We look at it differently. So that's the nugget I'll throw at you. Tim, I'll let you take the rest of it.
Gee, thanks. We've got. I use that a lot when I'm talking. Dr. Lloyd's gone around about the 70% mortality reduction and so forth, and I throw in at the end, as he threw in when I first heard him say it, how I'd rather keep someone alive to get them into real treatment for another day. Now, as he said yesterday, you're glad to see some of these patients just show back up at the clinic, but they haven't died yet. But you mentioned I want give my feelings and my perspective. I try not to use feelings or even personal perspective. You use evidence-based medicine, right? And to this other gentleman, his question, what's the difference between Suboxone and Subutex? The magic medicine is called buprenorphine. It's been around for a long time. We used it when I was a resident in anesthesia in the ICUs. We use it IV called Buprenex, and it worked really well because it's got the potency of morphine as far as relieving pain, anywhere from 30 to upwards of 90 times more potent. But the beauty of it is that it has a ceiling on respiratory effect. The way that people die of overdose is they stop breathing, and that's the opiate that primarily does that. Benzodiazepines, the Xanaxes and the Klonopins thrown in, and contributes to that. But when you use buprenorphine, Buprenex in the ICU, you don't want those people to stop breathing, but you want to help them with their pain because they've got acute trauma. So Buprenex works very well there. I think you probably have some experience with that as well. So evidence-based medicine, as Dr. Lloyd said, I refer to, again, you look at the studies on methadone for the past 50 years, the studies on buprenorphine for the past 14 years, what works is maintenance treatment. And sometimes these people can get down to as low as 2 milligrams per day, which is a quarter of a tablet, the typical 8 milligram tablet, and the bioavailability is only 25%. So you're talking about 0.2, 0.5 milligrams in the bloodstream, and that's what keeps them functional. As Dr. Lloyd said, when he was taking the medicines, and as all my patients say, they're not taking it to get high, they're taking it to feel normal. That's what makes them feel normal. Now in that case, that person may not need to feel normal, but it does have the cravings under control, which may have something to do with new opiate receptor subtypes and so forth. But suffice it to say, there is a difference. I forgot to mention the difference. Suboxone has the blocker in it called naloxone, and we could get into a big discussion about that, but that's the difference. I find it interesting that when we talk about evidence-based medicine and evidence in general, what really works in drug courts, and Dr. Lloyd is a member of the drug court in Greene County, having consequences. As Dr. Lloyd will tell you, he had the best treatment. Who does the best? Pilots and doctors. They get the best treatment and they have the most severe consequences. They've got good jobs. They make a good living, and they will lose it if they don't get better. A lot of these patients don't have those consequences, but in drug court, that can be a consequence. But at least in Northeast Tennessee, if you test positive for medication, you're kicked out of drug court. At the federal level, they promote medically assisted treatment in drug court. It's like sending someone up to diabetes camp as a child and saying, by the way, you can't use your insulin. At least that's my view.
Can I jump in?
You can't.
I think part of the problem for all of us, is that everything works and nothing works. So because the addiction is a disease that we are really don't even totally get yet, because I personally believe that it's many diseases in one, and have for many years. So all of the things you say work, right? So there are people that need to be maintained for the rest of their life on medicine, just like you would with insulin. There are people that need to detox with this medication, and with the proper supports can be just fine. There are people that may need to be on it for a couple of years and they taper themselves off. There are people who can go to AA and stay clean forever. There are people that need to go to rehab and then go to AA and they stay clean forever. There are people who only need to go to church and they stay clean forever. We do not have an answer for you, unfortunately, because everybody is so different that everybody's treatment looks different and becomes different. So we don't have all the answers yet, and that's why there is such a polarization, even within our own community, about what we should do and what we should not do as far as addiction is concerned.
Well said, Dan. I'll get your question in 1 second. Those of you who like reading references, there are several books that I highly recommend, and they're readable for anyone. The first one is Clean, C-L-E-A-N, by David Sheff. David was a writer for the New York Times and the New Yorker magazine, and he watched his son, Adam, go through methamphetamine addiction. And David has pretty much dedicated his life to addictive disease since that time. And if I ever get to teach a class on addiction with some of my friends, I think that Clean will be our text. If you look at the folks who get, and this is a little bit of this is personal. If you look at people who get into addiction medicine, why they get into it? For the most part, they had the problem themselves. That's why I got into it. I had no interest in it before until it happened to me. And the problem with that is that when you get a group of people that's what draws them into the field, they think that the only way to get better is the way that they got better themselves. And you become pragmatic about it. And I was just like that. I was faced with my own arrogance. I had the treatment that I had, and I had some success early on, and a lot of support. And I looked around at these folks, and I thought, well, what are they doing? They just keep doing the same thing. Look at me. And boy, I hate that. I hate when I'm faced with myself, because when I started doing this, I started seeing, well, Steve, if you don't make it, you're an idiot with all that you were given. These folks are really, so I couldn't do what half my patients, there's no way I could do it. And so the thing that gets me down the most is that when I get a group of people in the room that I know all mean well and want to do good things, and then we start fighting about practice model. And that wears me out. I've lost friends over it. Because the first thing that I want to do, and I think everybody at this table does, we want people to live. So medication is I always think of it as the bait. Okay, now I've got something, you're not going to get sick, and I can quell your cravings. As Tim put, I can clear your brain up a little bit. And now we have time to intervene with the behavioral changes that we're talking about. Because if I just give you the medicine and you go back into your homes, and the guy that you're living with, who, in a new term I learned, I had no clue what this meant 5 years ago, the baby daddy, had no clue what that was. I know a bunch of baby daddies now. If he's coming in, he's sleeping with you, he's leaving, he's not paying you any child support, when do you get to the point that you wake up and say, people care, if you want to know what somebody cares about, look at their checkbook. Okay, how much is he giving you to support your child? And then if he's not doing that, then he doesn't have any right to come into your life and take things from you. Okay, those are behavioral changes that we have to teach. And so I get so down. I've lost close friends over this. They said bad things about me. I want people to live first. And we know medication will make them live. We know it. And then what can we do from there? It'll depend on brain connections. It'll depend on the amount of time they've been exposed to the opiate narcotic. It'll depend on a lot of things. It'll depend on the support system that they have. Daryl, those of you who met Daryl yesterday, do I think Daryl can live off medication? Yes, I do. Okay, I do. And for this reason. A group of psychologists that are actually the psychologists for the New York Mets said that people stop using drugs when the enjoyment they get out of their life is more than the enjoyment they get out of the drug. I think Daryl has that in his life now. He's got a successful business. He's got a beautiful wife. He's got 2 kids. He's got some stuff. Okay? So I think Daryl can live without medication.
And I think he will.
I do
He
too.
will over time.
I do too.
But he has to get past the fear.
He does. Because when you start talking about taking that away, okay, even if it's just a little bit, we got a guy that's like on 1/4 3 times a week. He's not even taking it, right? But you know, I use a line. Those of you that know the movie Bull Durham, right? In the movie Bull Durham, the pitcher is wearing women's underwear underneath his uniform, and he thinks he's pitching good. Crash Davis says, if you think you're pitching good because you're wearing women's underwear, then you are. And so I believe that. If you think that that's helping you and your life is getting better, then I can't stop. Somebody had a hand up over here.
Yeah, I just want to make a comment. You're talking about opiate substitution therapy, whether you're talking about Suboxone or methadone. And, you know, that began in the mid-'60s during an earlier heroin epidemic. Law was passed that allowed methadone to be prescribed to treat addiction. And within a year or two, the studies were clear. People that were on methadone were getting arrested less. Their families were staying together. They held down jobs. They were employed. There was no question that what people on substitution therapy were doing better than they had been previously. So, you know, I don't think there's any question what people's lives improve with opiate substitution therapy, whether it's methadone or Suboxone.
And you know, the risk of peripheral diseases, you know, hepatitis C, HIV goes down as well. But I wanted to make another comment, and I think Deanna can speak to this, and maybe these guys that know people on substitution therapy. You know, when I see patients for the first time, or even some patients I've been seeing well over a year, they all actually look forward to getting off the medicine. They all say, I want to wake up one day and not need this medicine. They all say that. But as Deanna said, they're all fearful of actually coming off the medicine. And so when I first see patients, and I believe this to be true, I say if there's any silver lining to the disease of addiction, is that it can be completely overcome. Your brain has neuroplasticity. It can heal. New connections can be made by changing your thoughts and your behaviors, changing people, places, and playgrounds. Your brain can heal. Unlike someone with diabetes whose pancreas is not working, it isn't going to get better without some kind of transplant or something. And so I always give them that hope, and I really believe in that hope, and I see them coming down. And yeah, I believe many of them will exist without the medication.
Yes, sir.
I'm just trying to think of the relationship between Suboxone and, say, the pre-contemplative stage of change. You know, is it advisable to prescribe something for somebody who enjoys their addiction or doesn't see a need to change their addiction?
Man, what a question.
Yes. The answer is yes.
What? So, yes.
What was the question?
Go ahead and repeat the question. It's too complex for me.
I got the stages of change. So you're
Right.
contemplative.
The pre-contemplative, I mean, is Suboxone really a good tool at that point?
The answer is always yes. And the answer is always yes because it gives us one more day to keep that human being alive, to give them a chance to come around to understanding the need for change.
Even if they sell for Suboxone?
Are they taking it? Okay. Do you remember this whole pile of addicts laying on the floor that they only need a pill a day to stay alive? And maybe that's all we can do for a year. Maybe it's all we can do for 2 years. But if it's my son, I want you to do it for 2 years until he's able and finally gets around to saying, okay, Ma, I need to change.
Steve, what was the question?
The question was, would substitution treatment like a Suboxone or methadone be advisable for someone who was in the pre-contemplative stage of change? So pre-contemplative, that not sold on the idea that they want to stop doing what they're doing because they kind of enjoy their addiction. And so Deanna's answer is always yes. And I think there's a lot of validity to that because one of the I guess the epidemic that's underlying in our area, and if you look closely in the news, you'll see it. It's Hep C, hepatitis C. Okay, hepatitis C is a vicious disease. It's chronic. The end stage of hepatitis C is cirrhosis, and and liver death, which you know, I just hate those deaths. I hate any death, but liver deaths in particular. So you have this population out here that has hepatitis C that we don't even know about it, and I don't know about, you know, the guys at the table, but I've yet to screen an intravenous drug user that's been hep C negative. I've never done it a single time, not once. All of them are positive. I break the news that people are hep C positive way more in my patient population outside the VA than I do of people in the hospital. So I think Deanna's point is valid, because, you know, I get this all the time. Well, you know, the drug's being sold on the street. Well, do you know what the literature says that most people who buy it off the street are doing with it? They're treating themselves. I got a guy who's an executive at a healthcare company in Kingsport, and he actually hired somebody to buy it off the street for him for 2 years because he didn't want to be seen going somewhere. You talk about the stigma of addiction. There you go. Right now, I finally told him, hey man, you're still breaking the law. Let's not get you thrown in jail.
And that's one thing about narcotic addiction. When someone is in the throes of withdrawal and they come across Suboxone or Subutex and they take it and they feel good for a good 24 hours. Again, when they're snorting or injecting, they're only feeling well for, you know, normal for a couple hours. They take this medicine, it's 24 hours. Well, they go from pre-contemplative to contemplative real quick. And then they buy it off the street to treat themselves for, I had one patient 3 years before he came to me, and then they decide that that's dangerous and they don't want to go to jail. And so then they come to see me. And to speak to Dr. Lloyd, I have one IV drug abuser that was very careful to use clean needles. He was a healthcare worker, and he indeed is hep C negative, but he's got the scars to show the prior use.
That question, and I want to ask Larry and Adam this. To me, medication is the lowest common denominator. We want to watch people's lives get better. Okay, that's the goal. Behavior changes. To me, that's the goal. The people that you work with, do you have people who are on medication? And if you do, does it affect the work that you do? And because there's no such thing as a magic bullet out there. The literature says that 18 to 20% of people abuse this medication. Okay, they just didn't. And the literature says it. So you have to be cognizant of that. Most of the babies that are born drug dependent in JCMC are born to mothers on replacement therapy. It does not prevent neonatal abstinence syndrome. Period. It doesn't. If anybody tells you it does, it's a lie. So I want to know, is your treatment and your interactions with you know, the people that you're reaching out to, does that play into how you approach them?
So in the in the VA, yeah, pretty much everybody that I encounters with some kind of medications, a majority related to their mental health, and I think sometimes they even come and talk to me and they say, I really think I'm on too much medications, and there's potentially an issue there that I don't address, but just say you need to be an advocate for yourself in having these conversations to look at, is it too much, what's needed, and figure out something. But as you were saying that, what came to mind is one specific individual who I've worked with for a number of years now, and he can be doing great for a period of time, and you know, he's volunteering, he's going to AA meetings because that's helpful, and he's going to church, he's really connected to his family and staying phone conversation, and now he actually lives nearby them. But when he's doing bad, one of the first questions I'll ask him is, have you taken your medications recently? And undoubtedly the answer is, kind of, you know, okay, so you're not taking your medications, so what are we going to do about that? And it's working on getting back into that routine, because it has always been the thing that's caused him to relapse and to go into deep depression and to start struggling with it in his life. And it's almost for him, it's when he's doing well that he begins to think in his mind, well, I don't need these. You know, other things are what are helping me most, and then he doesn't necessarily consider the connection that his medications are playing into his recovery and him staying balanced. And so, yeah, so I think that is a question that I'll often bring up just to check and see, okay, so you're talking about these medications that you're prescribed, are you taking? And how have they been helping? Because a lot of times you'll see in their treatment programs that they'll take the medications while they're in a residence in the program, and they're doing well and they're stable and they're in a structured environment, but then when they transition out and it's their responsibility completely and the structure's gone and they have to create their own structure, that's when things start to fall apart for them. And one of those pieces is medication.
Eric, you want to speak to that?
I cannot believe how much Xanax is in the church, to be honest with you. Yeah, medication is a big part of what people are dealing with in the church community. And sometimes it's very open, very acceptable. Certain things aren't, other things aren't. I think I use Xanax there as an example. Most people are okay with it. What was surprised to a lot of people in our churches is how many people are using Suboxone, and how it's gotten them to a point where we can have conversations, where we can talk about the reason addiction started in the first place, to really deal with some of the demons that are in their lives. And the same thing with other medications. I think it's really important, and I'm a big advocate. I partner with a lot of primary care physicians. When somebody comes to me and they're sharing that they've been feeling depressed, anxiety levels are very high, I think it's so important to partner, because first of all, there's something going on physiological that needs to be dealt with. I'm great at the spiritual stuff. I'm great at the mental health stuff. We need to have other partners out there. And by doing that, we're able to, a lot of times, just be able to have conversations that need to happen. And a lot of people, and I really appreciate this about the church community, is that they want to get past that. They don't want this to be a long-term thing. For some people, it just will. But for others, they're working through it, and they're getting to the point where, you know, they're not reaching for the Xanax right away. They've gotten to the point where, you know, they've gone down to using it once a week or when they have a major episode, and that's progress. That is success.
It is. I want to point out just a couple of things that we see here locally. If you start paying attention to the newspaper, you'll see this stuff everywhere. You know how many people died in the Washington County Jail last year? Anybody know? 6. There's 6 people died in the Washington County Jail. What do you think they died from? Really prison fights. They didn't have a riot. And I sure would like to know. I'd like to look at some autopsy reports, because what I suspect is they died from drug withdrawals. So I went down to the Washington County Jail, and I've been in there, and I think there's good people that work there. But you got to remember, look at the busted paper. How old are those people that are going to jail? About your all's kids' age, right? Young, 20s, early 30s. And when they put you in jail, acutely intoxicated on drugs, you're not withdrawing. But jail, you know, it's not like the Andy Griffith Show where there's 4 cells right there, and you know you can see through them because they're bars. They have doors, and the doors have a window on them, and they've got a pod down here that they monitor things. So you get people, you put them in those cells where you can't see them. And if you take somebody who's on Xanax, just like Larry said, you take somebody on Xanax as opposed to somebody on opiates, and you let them withdraw. If I take you and I put you in here on opiates, and I say, all right, I'm going to take them away from you, and I'm going to put you in this room, and I'm going to come back in 2 weeks. I come back in 2 weeks, you're not going to be dead. You're not going to like me, and the room's probably not going to smell very good, but you are going to be alive. If you do that to somebody who's on Xanax or alcohol, they'll die. They'll die. And so what we do to people who are incarcerated, we take away their basic right to be cared for. And we do it all the time. And we've had 6 deaths in the jail. Now, one of those kids who died in jail, his granddaddy has money out in California, and he's hacked. So I'll be interested to see what happens. If you withhold medication from patients, you're violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. Addiction is covered as a disability. So I think that we need to look at that. New York City, you know, started using MAT, or medication-assisted treatment, in Rikers Island, in the prisons, in the Crips riot in the early 1970s. And they watched their recidivism rate, just like Jack said, go straight down. You have to pay attention to that. And there are things that we can do right now that will decrease our jail population, and I think we need to, you know, I think we need to keep a more open mind about it. Jack?
Steve, I'd like to respond to the pre-contemplation question. I think it's important to understand that if someone is taking Suboxone, they can't continue to abuse the street drugs they've been abusing. The Suboxone is also a blocker, and that's related to the ceiling effect that Dr. Smith referred to. I mean, I've had patients that I've prescribed Suboxone to that have come back and told me that they went out and bought OxyContin in the meantime, and they were terribly disappointed because they had got no effect from the OxyContin and they'd wasted their money. So, you know, even your pre-contemplator is not taking the Suboxone and then going out and continuing to abuse street drugs.
That's a great point. The buprenorphine that Tim talked about has such a greater affinity for that receptor, it'll actually displace all the other ones. So if you take it on top, just like Jack said, you are terribly disappointed.
And I'd like to add that I think that every addict is in pre-contemplation stage when they run the process. You know, I mean, they all might be showing up and saying, yeah, I really want to help, but if you wait 5 minutes, they'll be gone. Yep. Because they can't make it.
I have a question about Suboxone. Can you have dental treatment? And naturally, you know, if you're having teeth pulled, most people need something for pain. I know someone that's needing dental treatment really bad. They're on Suboxone, and they won't go to the dentist because they can't get anything for the pain. And a secondary to the same person, a fairly young man, taken Suboxone for a year, but now has quit working and is home at 10 o'clock. And I'm hearing you say, you know, most people can work with the Suboxone. If you're like 35 to 40, you've been doing Suboxone for about a year, is he over-medicated? Is the reason he has to come home and be in bed by like 10 o'clock in the morning? That might be too general.
No, I want to dig into that one because I smell a rat. And I'm not comfortable with that. If you look at the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's a pamphlet called Know Your Rights that's put out by the Department of Health and Human Services that talks about MAT, but methadone and buprenorphine. You can be in any profession. You can be doctor, lawyer, bus driver, cop, and be on the medication. It doesn't have the effect that opiates have. So I'm smelling the rat there. I'd like to see a drug screen on that one because I can't. It doesn't matter how old you are. The more, it's what Dr. Woodside said a while ago. The more you take, you don't get more and more effect. It has a ceiling effect, and so I'm a little squirrely with that one. I think there's more to that story. And the other thing is somebody taking something in addition to the medication-assisted therapy, either buprenorphine or methadone, like Larry said, Xanax. You know, people take Xanax because we've got an epidemic of nerves here in East Tennessee, and you got to treat nerves. Okay, but nerves are fear, and fear leads to anxiety. So, Tim, I want you to answer that about the question about the dental workers. We run into this one all the time. And before you do that, I'll tell you about my worst one. I had an OBGYN doctor in Southwest Virginia that did a C-section on one of my young ladies and didn't give her any pain medication. So he and I don't do well together.
Well, when it comes to treating pain, and you're on Suboxone, there's a couple of different schools of thought. You know, my personal paradigm on dental pain is, you know, is that the anti-inflammatories work as good as anything, and there's actually good data to support that. And 95+% of the people that are having dental work don't need an opioid. Oftentimes it's prescribed to them because the patients lean on the dentist to do so, and for whatever reason that may be. So I'll get that out there. But you know, talking about the young lady that had a C-section, she had true pain. You know, you can actually add pain medicines on top of the Suboxone, and they will get some pain relief from that, which is a little bit contrary to what we're talking about, it binding to the receptor more tightly, not getting any effect, but it actually works. The way that I prefer to do it is you just have the patient use their current dose of Suboxone or Subutex and take it more frequently. When you're treating addiction, you want them to take it just once a day. That handles their cravings and any withdrawal for a full 24 hours. But when you're treating pain, you only get about 4 at most 6 hour effect. So they break their dose up and they take it every 4 to 6 hours, and I've done that many times, and they get adequate relief no matter what surgery they're getting.
And that's, I think if you look at the downside to what we see with medications, most of the places, or a lot of places that do it look no different than the pill mills that got the problem started in the first place. And if you want to get in touch with the doctor who's prescribing it, you can't because he only works an hour a week. And so that's on us. That gives, we have to move this into the mainstream. The places have got to not look like dope houses. They need to be where the other doctor's offices are. Need to work off of appointments. Nobody, the cardiology office doesn't have everybody show up at a herd at 7:30 in the morning and see them on a first come, first served basis. So I think there's a lot of things that we can do to improve the image. But when you see patients that are having their teeth pulled or having C-sections, and you have a doctor out there that says, we can't give you anything for pain, that is, to me, that is absolutely frightening. And I would submit to you that the young lady who had the C-section, that's assault. Because the least you could have done was pick up the phone. All my patients have my phone number. It's everywhere. It's on every bathroom wall I can write it on. All you have to do is call me, and I will help you manage to do it. And I've never had a patient relapse in the ones that we've treated.
There's a lady, she's been trying to
Oh, I'm sorry. Pardon me.
Forget what I'm going to say. I wanted to say that I've been clean and sober for 3 years now, and I've been in all the recovery groups around town. And one of the things I see that's missing, it says narratives of substance abuse, faith, and recovery. We talked a lot about substance abuse, a lot about recovery, but very little about faith. And I know that in the rooms, what we like to call the trenches, which is like the infantry, right? The alcoholics and the worst of the worst drag in. And we're real in there. We get real with one another. And one of the things that people want to talk about, whether they want to or not, is God. And God is at the center of everybody's being. And whether a lot of them say, I hate God. That's fine, because we get it out. We talk about it. We get through it. Because it gives them some purpose. Because there's no real solution, but it's the center of everybody's heart. And every room I've ever been in, God is somewhere to be found, eventually. And also, it's kind of a misconception that most addicts want to remain on drugs, because I can tell you the most that I've run into will give anything not to be on any drug if they could have their way. They're in denial that, yes, I feel good today, but deep down inside they do not, and they're looking for something of substance, of real substance. And that's all I wanted to say. And I want to thank y'all for what you do, because, we can't do it without you. So thank you.
Thank you.
That's a great point. I'll let the chaplains handle that one. How do you address that? Because I can tell you, here was my misconception. When I went to rehab, I was an agnostic at best and an atheist at worst. And I told the group yesterday, if I saw God, if I believed in God, I believed He wasn't watching. And there is a huge spiritual component to any disease process. I would submit to you. How do you go about addressing that? Because I have a fair number of people who've been harmed by that process. And then, Chip Dodd's the first person that told me it was okay if I told God I hated him. He said he's bigger than you, he can handle it. And so there was a long time that I did hate him. I've never heard anybody in East Tennessee talk like that. If I told God I hated him, then I might as well go out and dig my own grave. I'm going straight to hell. So how do you bring that out? How do you break through that resistance to something bigger than yourself?
We talked about the damage and some shame and some of the hurts that we've had that are in the past that led to addiction. And some of those hurts actually come out of the church. Some of those hurts come out of I think, well-intentioned community that sometimes said, well, if you only believe strong enough, you won't have this issue. If you would just turn away from sin, you'll be fine. And just believe in Jesus, and that will go away. And I came to Christ, and I quit all addiction that day. Like I said, I love those stories, but those are only some of the stories. Now, I work with a number of people who have been struggling with addiction for years, and who profess Christ, and I work with people who have also say that they became a Christian and addiction stopped for them. Both those stories are real and authentic. It's not one or the other. It is all kinds of stories that are out there. The church needs to understand, and the faith community needs to understand that people have been hurt by us. We have slammed the door in the face of a lot of people who have needs. We need to apologize for that sometimes. When I have somebody tell me that they hate God because of something that's happened in their past in the church, we gotta start there. Because it's that hurt that maybe is the reason you're dealing with that addiction that day. There's a lot of cleanup that we have to do. There's a lot of looking at ourselves first, understanding that we're broken. Understand that the words that come out of my mouth can hurt you just as bad as whoever said that some decade ago. We have to take ownership of that. We have to redeem that in a lot of ways. I see faith as a partner with our mental health community and our mental community in overcoming addiction. I see faith as a key component that can make a huge difference in the lives of people. And what's so neat is that we can do this in a society today where we're losing health insurance, mental health insurance, where we're losing the ability to have access to treatment. The church can make a difference. And we can do it for hardly anything, for a fraction of the cost. We are a partner. We're not better, we're not worse, we're actually a partner.
So Dr. Lloyd, you brought up the kind of the Appalachian culture and kind of how the God image comes out of that. And I don't want to make a statement of an absolute here, but I do want to say a lot of the veterans that I come across, their upbringing has instilled in them kind of what you were referencing of a God who's judgmental, who's condemning, who's hellfire and brimstone, and really who they're afraid of. And that doesn't seem to do anything positive for their recovery, for them working towards sobriety, and it actually seems to hinder it in some ways because it just further seems to instill that kind of sense of guilt and shame in their lives, to where, why they use, well, a lot of veterans that I see, they use because of their internal struggle with the shame of how they see themselves and the guilt over things that they've done. And so they use, and then they sober up, and then they feel more guilt and shame over what they've done, and so they use, and it becomes a cycle for them. And, so one of the things that I'm really intentional about, and one of the groups I do in our treatment program for substance use is to talk about that and to differentiate between, okay, well, the way you grew up doesn't have to be the way that you believe now. And that, there can be a process in recovery in your spiritual religious beliefs and what you choose to accept and believe in that doesn't necessarily have to fit what you were raised in, how you were raised. And so there's a kind of differentiation process in that. And coming into, what do I believe? If I believe in God, what does that God look like? And I work with a lot of individuals who don't have that belief in God, but they have a belief in some other form of higher power. And sometimes, like one of the common ones that comes up is they look at their higher power as the support group that they're a part of. Maybe AA, maybe NA, maybe Smart Recovery, and the way they look at it is they say, well, this support is at least a little more stable than I am, and so I can look toward it for some resources, for some help that's going to help me in that journey. And maybe later on they develop belief in God, but for that time being, they have a belief in some kind of higher power that's going to aid them in furthering their process in recovery. So I think, for me, it's working with them and having conversations about, well, what do you believe in? Well, you don't have to believe that God hates you for what you did, and you don't have to believe that you can't express anger towards God, because, like you said, God's big and can handle that. So I think it's important to have those kind of conversations and help them to come to a healthier understanding and image of God that's going to be beneficial and healing and hopeful for their journey ahead versus being the thing that continues to bring them down in their life.
I think Adam would agree. We probably walk a lot of people through helping them reframe their theology in order to be able to accept a God that you can be angry at and that maybe that you can be hurt with. I think it's an important part of a lot of the conversations that I have, that in fact we use the idea of lament a lot of times, of being able just to wail and yell at God and say, you know, why me? What did I do? Why me of all people? And that can be healing. Healing at God can be healing.
You said that, I thought of Lieutenant Dan in Forrest Gump. He's out there and he is mad at God in the middle of a hurricane, and after that moment, Lieutenant Dan was okay, and I love God's thanks for that. I need to hear that.
Can we tell people what smart recovery is? I think that it's relatively new on the scene that everybody has all of our lingo now.
What smart recovery?
Yeah, I can handle it.
Now that I'm saying it, it just dawned on me that we're starting to throw a lot of addiction language around and people may not know what we're talking about. So Smart Recovery is a relatively new program that's very much like AA and NA. It was developed by a psychiatrist and it's totally cognitive behavioral based. So it's just another program in our arsenal.
Just had a comment. I work with hundreds of different faith leaders, clergy, faith institutions, prayer groups, you name it, from the bottom to the top, bishops, conferences, associations. And what happens is we have the person who suffered from addiction to come into the church, and we can reorder or restructure their theology. But what we need to do in the process is educate the congregation on what they're going through and how to talk to them. When people suffer from addiction, their language changes, their lifestyle changes. So we as congregation members, I say we, and I'm also a man in recovery. I'm 15 and a half years in recovery. And the work that I do right now is I mobilize the faith community to combat addiction. I think the faith community is the last strong point against addiction. Coupled with everything that we do, with all due respect. But educating our congregations, that's our community. When you educate that specific piece of the community, every addict that walks in that door is going to feel at home. There's more power in the pews than there is in the jail. So when people come in and you understand their language, you understand how to talk, listen, there's power in wisdom in age. So just because a person's age is different than the person that they're talking to, doesn't mean they necessarily don't have a message for them. Addiction is the same. The game might sound a little different, but it's the same issue. And we as people thought we had everything under control, just like these guys have said in the 60s and the 70s. I wasn't alive until the 70s, but you know, I was early 70s. But we talk about addiction, and addiction is like an ever-evolving predator. Every time we think we have it trapped, or we think we have it stopped, it finds another way to come out. We thought we had it here, we thought we had it there, and then our kids went under the sink and they made drugs. So what do? I believe the education piece, I'm listening to all of you talk, and you hit right home. We can restructure the theology of the person who who says, I hate God. Because they have been taught through fire and brimstone, through message, the Old Testament is torn into pieces. They haven't quite evolved over to the next part. But it's up to us as a community, and however you define your community is up to you. It's up to us as a community to educate amongst ourselves, to understand the language. And we have to move beyond the language of moral failing. We have to get beyond that and start. I'm not trying to change anybody's doctrine. I'm not challenging anybody's belief. But if you want change, you want to instill change, you want to motivate change, you want to push change, you're going to have to look at addiction like a treatable disease. Realize people can live with it, and you're part of the medicine.
When we go to faith communities, that should be when we go to faith communities, introduce the idea of an addiction recovery program, the response we get a lot of times is, well, those people are going to start coming to our church.
Absolutely.
And the response I usually have back to them is, those people are already there.
Oh, of course. I'm scared to tell you no.
I've helped through with other volunteers and people start with 20 support groups in the last 60 days, 20 new support groups, And some of them are not necessarily AA or NA, they're just people with a pot of coffee in the faith community. People are realizing that the faith community is the missing component.
That's right.
That's what's missing.
That's right.
Helping people find their faith, because I honestly believe, in my personal opinion as a man of faith, that if you don't have faith, how can you overcome something that you can't see? It's just a, it's a strange thing. But those people argument, I've worked with some different church boards, and we've had meetings and talked about finding a champion in the congregation to head your meeting. And I hear that all the time. Well, those people are going to come to our church, or we don't have anybody that's an addict in our 3,000-member church. And something that's happening is I always see somebody that's been there 20 years. They'll say,
yeah.
They'll do like this, and then everybody's like, well, yes, what can I help you? Yes, I've been in recovery for 20 years, and then I'll see the pastor or someone in the faith community that's been there for just as long, look at them and say, you didn't tell me, and their response is, you didn't ask. So the open conversation, again, those people, we can change that language into us if we continue to educate the faith community. I love what you guys are doing. You guys are kind of like the super friends, the Justice League, faith medicine. So I really appreciate that. I like
a whole lot cooler than I really am.
We're going to get you t-shirts.
We need a chair for you. Okay.
Dr. Lloyd, I was just going to mention too, one part of that too with the theology piece is, I think as I'm talking to veterans, is looking at a practical theology in terms of how do you practice being in that relationship with God or that higher power. And I think that's important as well, because so many times it's like, well, I just throw up a prayer anytime I'm in crisis, or when I'm in the midst of another relapse, and so anytime I'm down in the valleys when I start crying out for help, but there's nothing that exists there when I'm on the mountaintop or when I'm anywhere in between. And so it's looking at practical theology of, like we were talking about earlier, connection and relationship with God in their lives that exists daily, and not just whenever crisis hits in their life.
Ed, as luck would have it, you get the final question. I'm glad it came down to this.
I agree with what he said so much, and we have a tendency to pass the buck to God. Why didn't God do this or not do this? Yeah, God works in miraculous ways, and He heals. Sometimes He doesn't, but sometimes He says, no, you do it. And we don't listen, and we don't want to do it, and our responsibility sometimes is to do what we're called to do without avoiding the issues, and without passing judgment, and without making opinions, and to get in the trenches where you stay, and to do the things that we should do, and not expect or blame someone else for not doing it, particularly God. If we did not have the opportunity to prove ourselves to our Creator, whoever that divine power will be, we're wasting our time, our Creator's time, and everybody's time around us. It's not a matter of waiting here for the bus to go to heaven. We've got to do something while we're here to make sure that we let other people know that we care about them. I don't mean this in a sacrilegious way, but God aside, we have a responsibility to let other people know that we care about them, not just walk blindly down the road and think everything's going to be okay and God's going to take care of his ends, because God's pretty busy. And we got to do something.
And I think that's a great way to close. And I'm going to tie it into this because it's exactly what you were talking about. Human beings only need two things. Does anybody know what they are? Everybody always guesses: food, water, sex, shelter.
Hope.
They need two things. And I'll tell you this: they'll do anything possible to make sure that they get it. Human beings have to belong and they have to matter. Just exactly what you're talking about. And that's where I think we step in and we show them they do belong and they do matter. If you don't believe that human beings absolutely have to belong and have to matter, look at how we punish people. We take them away, put them by themselves, we isolate them. If you misbehave there, we further isolate you to where you don't belong and you don't matter. And look at gangs. Look at the Crips, the Bloods, all the street gangs. They never belonged and mattered to anything in their life except for that gang, and they'll die for it. Human beings have to belong and to matter, and I think that is what we have to do. We have to show them that they do belong and they do matter. Guys, it's after 8 o'clock. We appreciate your time. Thanks to you guys for your awesome